Hey everybody, welcome to the Orange and Brown Talk podcast. Dan Labbe, Mary Kay Cabot, Ashley Bastock, Ashley's giant dog as well, in and out of the camera if you're watching on YouTube. We are recording this here on Tuesday. It's about 4 o'clock, and we're going to talk Browns quarterbacks here on the Orange and Brown Talk podcast because why not? I feel like we're just sort of in a holding pattern here, Mary Kay, because I know a lot of teams, they're doing some of their OTAs this week. I've seen some clips from the Bengals and some other teams, but the Browns, we're not going to be out there until next week. We got 2 weeks of OTAs, a week of mini camp, and then there's a weird week of OTAs after that I would imagine there aren't going to be many veterans at. But sort of in a holding pattern here and just sort of waiting to see how this quarterback competition is going to play out, how the Browns are going to do this. Of course, you put up a post kind of laying out what it might look like. And I've got to say, maybe it's because we talk about it so much here on the pod and I've read what you've written about it so often, but I was a little taken aback by how people kind of clung to the excerpt in your story laying out that, you think it's going to be Kenny Pickett, Dillon, Gabriel, Joe Flacco, Shedeur, Sanders in kind of that order to start things out. That's obviously not necessarily the order on September, whatever, but when we get out there next week, you expect that to be the order. I guess I was just a little surprised, and maybe it's just because we're in this content desert right now with the Browns. I was surprised that people were surprised by that, to be honest.
Right? So was I. I was flabbergasted, but it illustrated for me the notion that a lot of people aren't necessarily reading every little word that we're writing these days. And a lot of people are aggregating things that we write, and people are picking things up along the way, but not necessarily reading the story. So I would encourage Browns fans to really stick with the people that are covering the team on a regular basis, that are out there, that have their eyes on this football team, and that are plugged into what is actually going on with this team, because we are the ones that know. And I have been writing this over and over again. That must have been, I would say, at least the eighth time that I've written the order of operations like that. At least the eighth time that I've written it. But this time it got clipped, right? Somebody screenshotted my paragraph about how I thought that might go with Kenny Pickett, Dillon Gabriel, and then Joe and Shedeur taking those third and fourth team reps. And I think that can be flip-flopped some, because even though I do think that Shedeur probably technically is starting out as the fourth quarterback in the pecking order, he needs more reps than Joe does. Joe's going into his 18th season. So even if we see Shedeur at times going ahead of Joe, which we don't know how that's exactly going to go, but I don't think it necessarily means that that is where he lands in the order of operations at this moment. And just because I have them ordered like that right now doesn't mean it's going to end up like that. Doesn't even mean it's going to be like that by the time we get to mandatory minicamp. I just think that is how it's going to be now. And I've said over and over and over again, I feel this way because this is the commitment that they showed to them when they acquired them, right? Shedeur and Joe were pretty much afterthoughts for the most part. They did not clamor to get them. And they would have been perfectly fine if both of those guys had landed with another football team. They would not have been perfectly fine if Kenny Pickett landed with another football team, and they would have not have been perfectly fine if Dillon Gabriel had either. So those are the two guys they wanted. The other two guys, Joe and Shedeur, are here for other reasons, because they want them to be part of the competition, but not necessarily because they felt they had to have them be part of the competition. So it's going to be interesting. And again, I think these quarterbacks can jumble up the order. I think they can give others a run for their money. I think Joe Flacco, and I think I said this yesterday, I think Joe Flacco, just because of his experience in this offense and because of his experience in general, is going to look, and his arm is going to look really darn good in training camp, and is going to make Jerry Jeudy look good and make David Njoku look good. So it's not going to be an easy competition, but as you said, the way that I laid it out, Two different sort of passing camps running at the same time, or passing drills running at the same time, as many drills as they can possibly get for these guys. Two sets of receivers, about 6 each. That's why they signed all those guys. And it's go time.
Yeah, and I think too, I think people need to understand sometimes the way we talk about it is it's not always necessarily like what we think. Like when we say Kenny Pickett's going to go first, it doesn't necessarily mean that I'm sitting here pounding the table that I think Kenny Pickett should be the starter for this football team and is the franchise quarterback. It's just we're looking at what we've seen with the Browns. The very first move they made in the offseason was to go trade for Kenny Pickett. They give up a 5th-round pick in DTR to bring him in. They draft Dillon Gabriel in the 3rd round in a situation where a lot of people were surprised by that. I don't know how many teams had a 3rd-round grade on him. They certainly are a team with other needs they could have filled there, but they chose Dillon Gabriel there. And then they signed Joe Flacco for $4 million in April, and they only took Shedeur Sanders when like the timing was perfectly right. And it was like, you know what? The value's too good. Let's trade up and take a chance on this guy. So that's what we're working off of, is how the Browns put this together, not necessarily how we would have done it or how we think it should shake out. Maybe it aligns, maybe it doesn't, but I think that's the other part of this, Ashley, is it's not always just, like I'm not sitting here saying, man, I think Kenny Pickett's going to be a star. I agree with Mary Kay. Like everything that the Browns have done has told us that they're the two guys they value the most. And however big that gap is, we'll find out. The two guys they value the most right now are probably Kenny Pickett and Dillon Gabriel.
Yeah, it's all about what you gave up in order to acquire these players. I think it's exactly right. And I think like it's similar to the alien conversation we had when we were just talking about Shedeur and Dillon Gabriel and who we would want. And I made a point in that discussion last week to be like, well, I would say Shedeur, but I think the Browns would say Dillon Gabriel. And another conversation we had right after rookie minicamp about do we think the Browns think that there's a franchise guy in that room potentially? And I think we all said like they probably think it's Dillon Gabriel because of how highly they already think of him. So yeah, it's kind of like what I think, what you guys think, what we think as a group is irrelevant in all of this. We are just observing, and now this regime has been here for 5 years, right? Like there is precedent here in a way that there hasn't often been precedent post 99. And you understand like when Kevin Stefanski or Andrew Berry does something, it's easier to understand a bit more maybe the thought process behind it, even if they're not explaining every decision they make. So it's like follow the money, right? Follow the draft assets, follow the picks, follow all these things they have done. I think there's a pretty clear pecking order here.
And Mary Kay, I think something you mentioned too that I think is important. So like we might go out there next week and it might look exactly like you said it's going to look. Here's Kenny and Dillon on one field and Joe and Shedeur on another. And then we might show up the next week and just for no reason in particular other than just to mix it up, maybe it's Dillon and Shedeur together and Joe and Kenny. Maybe they want to get looks at those guys next to each other in different ways. I don't think Kevin right now is tied to a pecking order necessarily, like 1, 2, 3, 4. I think it's more of I want to see what guys look like next to each other. I want to see what guys look like with particular sets of receivers. I think we're going to see a lot of experimentation, and we only get to watch. We get two. We're going to get 2 real OTA practices again. I don't know what that 3rd OTA week is going to be if it even happens, and then we're going to get 3 minicamp practices. So we only get to see like 5 out of what's going to be like 15 practices. And it might look very different every single day just based on like Kevin has a plan mapped out and he wants to see guys next to each other. He wants to see guys with different receivers, all of that stuff, because I kind of feel like going into training camp, they got to have this thing narrowed down to as close to a 2-man battle as possible. I just don't think you can go into training camp with this plan of we're going to spend the next 2 or 3 weeks dividing reps among 4 guys.
Yeah, I think by the time they get to training camp, they better have a pretty darn good idea of who they think their number 1 and number 2 quarterbacks are. I don't think it can be a level playing field heading into training camp, or they're going to be in trouble when they try to start the season against 2 AFC North foes and then go on the road for 4 out of their next 5 games beginning in week 4. So I don't really think that that would be the greatest strategy in the world. But when we look at these OTAs, there are a number of different ways, as you mentioned, that they could do it, because you've got maybe Kenny is the number 1 and maybe Dillon is the number 2. Maybe then you pair Shedeur with Kenny, and then you pair Dillon with Joe. So it goes Dillon first and then Joe, and Kenny first and then Shedeur in those particular drills. Or they could do it any number of different ways, and maybe they'll be mixing it up as they go along. But I do think that it will be important that all of the quarterbacks get some time with all of the receivers, because obviously you do have to make it as fair as possible. You can't have Kenny Pickett throwing to Jerry Jeudy and then have Shedeur Sanders throwing to Cade McDonald and think that you're going to have an apples to apples comparison when you're sitting there in the film room trying to figure out what you're doing with all of this. So they have to give them equal opportunities with all of the different receivers. But once again, sooner than later, they need to get their starter, and at least their backup, working with the starters. That first team offense needs as much time on task as possible. I never saw it in training camp last year. Almost never saw it in training camp last year. I knew it was going to be a problem. The few times that we did see it, it was ragged. It was uneven. Even Jerry Jeudy was suffering from a knee injury and barely practiced at all. So that's got to change this year. I think they need way more time on task. And then I think they also need way more situational football. You need to see more real football at a fast tempo and a fast pace as much as you can, as soon as you can.
Yeah, that's another discussion. Like just this whole idea of like, I felt like we didn't see a ton of 2-minute until Minnesota came to town, right? And we just didn't see a lot of that, especially 11 on 11. We would see some 7 on 7 stuff, but I always felt like the team periods last year just were really lacking as far as let's do some move the ball, let's do some 2-minute, let's do some competitive 1v1, see what this looks like. The other part of this, Ashley, is I do want to see, I want to see the rookies get some opportunities with the first team. And the best opportunity for that might be here in the spring, because like Mary Kay said, once you get to camp, you got to get your guys ready to play football. I would like to see Shedeur Sanders and Dillon Gabriel get work with the first team, just to see how does it look like against Denzel Ward. And, Carson Schlesinger is another rookie, but he'll probably be a first team guy. Myles Garrett, Mike Hall, all these guys, this first team defense that we think can still be pretty good. I want to see what it looks like against them, even though it's still in a practice setting.
Yeah, that is really, I think, going to be the only way to gauge where they are. I think if you're the Browns, you have to know what level you're starting at with both of these rookies. And you don't just want them, like, we know, obviously, they signed extra receivers, right? They have the 3 tryout guys they signed from rookie minicamp weekend. But, like, you don't only want them throwing to those guys either. And I think with quarterbacks, like, so much of the success, which we've talked about, is your chemistry with your pass catchers and all those things. So I do think you need to be mixing it up. Like, yes, you need to see it against actual first team defenders, but I think it's going to be important for all those guys to get looks with Jerry Jeudy, David Njoku, Ced Tillman, like your top of that pass catching core, just because you need to see who gels well with what, right? I mean, I think that is like one of the biggest keys and X factors. And I think last year when guys were hurt for so long, we saw so many injuries that impacted them early in the season. Like, it was very clear. So I think it is going to be important to mix them up in that way too, for sure.
So, Mary Kay, what do you think, what do you think the Browns can accomplish here in the spring when you look at this quarterback battle? And it's just, when I think about it, it just seems so overwhelming. 4 guys going at once. And there's, like I said, I think when you go into camp, you've got to have it down to 2. It's probably not going to be the 2 rookies leading the way when we get into camp. I suppose there's a world where that happens. But what do you think the Browns, how do you think they're going to accomplish this? Do you think they can accomplish this in spring to get to a point where we can get to training camp and it's like, okay, these are these are the two best guys, whether it's Kenny and Dillon or Kenny and Joe or Shedeur and whatever it looks like. These are the two best guys. Go at it.
I think you have to throw a lot at them. I think you have to give them a lot of install as quickly as you possibly can. And I think what you want to see them doing in OTAs when they're in their 11 on 11s, I think you want to see how they're handling the pre-snap stuff. How are they in the huddle? How are they managing the motions, calling the protections, and getting everyone lined up? I think pre-snap operations are going to be key. You can't be bumbling around in the beginning of the season when you're going to be playing the Ravens and you're going to be playing the Bengals, and then you're playing three good NFC North defenses. You have to be on point. So just the whole operation of it, I think, is going to be very key. Now, who's going to look good in that? Joe Flacco is going to look good in that because he can do some of this stuff blindfolded. And then, of course, I think Kenny's going to look good in that. And I've said this a number of times before, and that is, I think Kenny hasn't been able to really roll out and show the new and improved version of himself that Kellen Moore has worked on and in the things that he has instilled in Kenny. So I think he's going to have a tendency to look good. But then you've got two rookies who have also played a lot of ball. I mean, you've got Dillon Gabriel, who is very smooth and efficient. And I thought he was that way with the pre-snap stuff, even in rookie camp. He just had an unbelievable command of that kind of stuff. So I think that's going to be important. And we're going to have to see, can Shedeur handle all of that stuff while learning a whole new scheme? These other guys have all had to pick up new terminology and new schemes very, very quickly. They've had to adapt and pivot to different coordinators. I mean, Shedeur has had Pat Shurmur as his offensive coordinator for a long time. He's had his dad, Deion Sanders, as his head coach for a long time. They've all been speaking a certain language for a long period of time. So he is almost an old dog learning new tricks for the first time, whereas all of the other guys are very used to change. Take Dillon Gabriel alone. He's probably had 6, 7, 8 different coordinators in his college career. He's done all different kinds of things. And so I think he just has that ability to pivot and adapt. And we know that Kenny can do that. And we know that Joe can do that. So these are some of the things to watch in the early going. But so that's it. I mean, that's probably one of the first things is just smooth operation. And then clean ball is going to be vitally important. Clean football is what they need to play this year. I've said this a number of times. If you just cut your giveaways in half, you're winning 3 more games right there. You're at 6 victories if you just cut down drastically on your giveaways. So they need to do that. They need to be making good decisions quickly and going to the right place with the football. And you don't want to be so worried about throwing an interception that you don't kind of throw a little caution to the wind in training camp, because that is the place to air it out a bit and see what you can get away with, see what you can do against a Denzel Ward, right? I mean, you kind of want to take a few chances and you want to take a few risks, but you want to keep it under control enough that you're not showing the coaches that you're going to be out there throwing interceptions, because they're not tolerating that this year. They're not tolerating it from anybody, including Joe, who has a tendency to throw them. So if you can show me that you can handle and manage the game pre-snap and post-snap and not throw interceptions, you're climbing way high to the top of the list.
Yeah, I think that's the other thing to remember here is there's a lot that we're just, again, I mentioned we're not going to see as many practices in the spring, but there's a lot we're not going to see as well, just from like who's excelling in the meeting room, right? Who's excelling and just in all of that off the field stuff when they're inside the building. And again, we're not seeing it. And I think the Shedeur thing is interesting because Mary Kay, we've talked about when he was coming out that of all these quarterbacks, he might kind of fit the Kevin Stefanski style of offense the best. And a part of that is because of he working with Pat Shurmur, an NFL coach, a guy who Kevin Stefanski came up under, like a West Coast disciple. And so Shedeur should feel pretty comfortable in this style of offense if it really is going back to Kevin Stefanski's roots. But Ashley, it's about who kind of what we see on the field is one thing, but who's going to excel when they're in that meeting room and they're put on the board and they're being asked questions. And obviously, Joe and Kenny have an advantage there, but if Dillon, Gabriel, or Shedeur Sanders can excel in that area, they can move up that depth chart pretty quickly.
Yeah, and the other thing I'm really curious about with this, well, I've been thinking about it since you brought it up, Mary Kay, on I think it was one of our podcasts after minicamp, maybe, but this idea that Kenny Pickett in the past has had really good training camps, like particularly when he was with the Steelers, and it hasn't necessarily translated once you get to games. So I'm also kind of fascinated by that. Like, how good is Kenny Pickett gonna look? And is it essentially not going to be reality if he does look really good, he wins the starting job because he's the front runner for it, like all these things we've been saying, and if it's still going to be a rough start? Like, I'm really curious because we know the Browns think they potentially have something with him. They obviously really like him. They think he could be one of these vets that has a chance to revive his career, change his narrative, however you want to put it. But I'm really fascinated to see, number one, how he does, and then, like you're saying, Dan, this stuff that happens behind the scenes that we're just never going to be privy to, because I think that is so important with rookies, right? And I remember talking to Dorian Thompson-Robinson a couple years ago, and him mentioning to us, like, oh, when he became the backup and had to go in that Ravens game in week 4 because Deshaun was a scratch like 2 hours before the game, and not even understanding like all the things he didn't know yet. And Dorian like played a lot of college football. I think, we all agree he's a smart guy. He obviously struggled here as Paulinka joins to give his take on the quarterback situation. Like, he struggled here, but he was somebody who had a lot of this experience and was very adamant, like, you don't know until you know and until you experience it. So I think like we're all going to be sort of, I think, tempered with what we see. Not that we usually aren't, but this is the first open competition in a while. And like, so much of what you see in training camp is important, but there's so much you don't see, and so much that ultimately like just ends up not mattering at the end of the day with what we get to see in these practice sessions.
All right, let's talk about one more guy. The guy that I know Browns fans definitely want us to talk about, that they can't wait to hear this name. But Mary Kay, you put up a post about this. Deshaun Watson is throwing the football. We're let's see, it's May, almost June. So we're like 5 months removed from that repair of the Achilles after it re-ruptured. So Deshaun is out of the boot. He is throwing to Jerry Jeudy and David Bell, or at least he was in this Instagram video. We know that he's been working out at the facility. That shouldn't be a surprise. Kevin or Andrew, somebody at the Combine told us that was going to be the case, that he was going to be working out at the facility. Does this mean anything, though? Because obviously at the owners' meetings, we had Jimmy and Dee Haslam calling it a big swing and a miss. Deshaun sort of responded to that on Instagram shortly after. Does it mean anything at this point, though, as far as this big overarching quarterback picture for the Cleveland Browns, that Deshaun Watson is throwing to receivers and he's got the boot off?
Well, here are some things that I do know. One of the things that I do know is that Deshaun Watson is not only determined to come back and play football again in the NFL, but he's determined to come back this very season. And that is what he is aiming for and gunning for. That is what he is trying to accomplish right now. And that is why you see him really pushing the envelope and working hard. And he is at that Browns facility every single day. He's in the meeting rooms. He's out there once again, as I wrote yesterday. He is throwing to Jerry Jeudy. He is throwing to David Bell and probably a couple of other guys as well. So he's coming along very well. We know that Andrew Berry has called him in the past a fast healer. I mean, some of the rhetoric coming from the Cleveland Browns has been weirdly positive about the outlook for Deshaun Watson playing again, right? I mean, because we have asked Andrew Berry and Kevin Stefanski numerous times if they ever see Deshaun suiting up and playing another down of football for the Cleveland Browns. And nobody's ruling him out. Nobody is ruling him out. And when it comes to the injury part, Andrew has said things like, it's too early to say. We know he'll miss significant time. Not sure when he'll be back. So I don't honestly know that. I mean, do they really know in the back of their minds that he is never touching the football field again for the Cleveland Browns, and that if he comes back, it's going to be that they have traded him somewhere else? I mean, maybe that could be part of it. But we do know that Andrew and Kevin, neither of those guys have slammed the door shut on Deshaun. Both of those guys, Andrew Berry and Kevin Stefanski, have said positive things about Deshaun and how hard he's working and how he's been in the meeting rooms. We know that. And then we know that Deshaun is aiming to come back this year. How it all goes, we don't know. And here's one of the reasons why. Because Andrew Berry is now especially gun shy about trying to predict injuries and players coming back from injuries, because he got a couple of things wrong last year, and he doesn't want to go through that anymore. So we are not getting any definitive word on what is going on with Deshaun. Every single time we ask, it's always like, we have to get him healthy first, and then we'll talk about what the next steps are. And he's not to that point yet, but I'll tell you what, by October, he could be there. And then we will have some legitimate questions to ask.
Yeah, listen, I would put the percentage of seeing him in a Browns uniform playing football this year in a real game at about the same percentage that Charles Woodson just bought of the Cleveland Browns. But I always look back at the 2016 Browns when they drafted old Cody Kessler. And, after all the praising his accuracy and all that, it felt like they really wanted a redshirt year for Cody. And then RG3 gets hurt in week 1, and Josh McCown gets hurt in week 2. And all of a sudden, Cody Kessler's starting week 3, and Terrell Pryor's playing a bunch of Wildcat quarterback. And it was a mess. So I guess what I'm saying is I've just learned to never say never. And if a guy is on the roster and he's cleared to play, and that last part is a very big hurdle when you're coming back from a second Achilles that just got repaired in January, and he's in shape, which again, in shape's not the right word. I think Deshaun is always going to be in shape, but like he's ready to play an NFL football game, that type of in shape. I have just learned, Ashley, to never say never. And like I said, I think the percentage is so tiny and so small. And I think there's so many ways the Browns can just sort of play this out where it's not even a topic of discussion, and they just kind of are able to push it aside. But if a guy's if a guy is on the roster and he's available, and for some reason a whole bunch of other quarterbacks have gotten hurt, I just have learned to never say never. And that's what the Cleveland Browns have taught me in life.
That's like the number one lesson I think the Cleveland Browns have taught all of us. Like, we could write a children's book about all the weird and improbable things. Well, a lot of it might not necessarily be appropriate fodder for a children's book, and it would probably make children very frustrated when you add in all the losing post 99. But I also think like this idea of if he's available and on the roster is so interesting, because it's already, I think, without Deshaun, kind of a fascinating discussion to be like, well, what are they going to do with 4 quarterbacks, and would they put somebody on the practice squad, and how would that work? And correct me if I'm wrong, but like my understanding is like on 53-man cutdown day, if you're on IR, you're just like done for the year, right? When it's time to cut the down, or no, did they change it?
I think it's up to 3 guys now. It changed. I think it changed last year. It was 2,
changed,
but I think
they've more than 2.
I think they've expanded it. We got to look into it, but I think they've expanded the number to guys you can put on IR and bring back on 53 cutdown day. But it is limited. It's very limited to how many you can do.
I think it's still 2. I could be wrong about that.
We'll look at it. I'll see if I can find it while you guys.
But it's at least 2. It's at least 2 that you can put on IR on cutdown day, and they can come back, and they can be part of your 8-man coming back profile.
And then PUP is they have to activate them within a certain window, correct? Like if you start the year on PUP, isn't there you have a certain
they have to be out a certain amount of time They have to
Yeah.
miss the whatever X number of games.
4
Yeah.
games. You have to be out at
Yeah.
least 4
Yeah,
games
yeah, that was
on
Chubb.
pup.
What happened with Chubb?
Yes.
And then when you come
Yes.
back, you have, your 21-day window and all of that. So,
Yes. Because I'm like, we just went through that with Nick Chubb, but like, it's not necessarily, I think, cut and dry in terms of where, like we can't say, he's definitely going to be here to start the year. I think they have a handful of options in terms of how they're going to classify him with this injury for roster purposes. And then obviously, see where he's at. But I mean, again, I use this example all the time, but it's so true. There was probably a 0.01% chance, or whatever the percentage is, 0.1% chance that he was going to come to Cleveland at all when they traded for him. And then he did. So truly, I mean, again, I've only covered this team for 5 seasons now, and you really can never say never when it comes to the Cleveland Browns.
Yeah, I think that's just what always sticks in my mind, Mary Kay. It's just it would be shocking, but we've seen shocking happen before, and when it comes to this league, and when it comes to needing to have somebody out there to play quarterback, like if he's available and he's your best option, you just never know. I would never rule anything out unless Andrew or Kevin or someone stands in front of us and says there is absolutely no way this is happening. We're done. We're moving on after this season. Which again, I think that's where this is all going. But it just, I don't know. I don't want to sit here on a podcast on May 20th and say, it'll never happen. And then we're doing a post-game pod on December 15th, and we're talking about Deshaun Watson's game against whoever.
well, Andrew Berry, when asked about whether Deshaun would still want to be here after he got booed when he was down on the field with the re-ruptured Achilles, he mentioned that he is totally invested in being here still. I thought that was interesting. I thought that was an interesting way to put it, that he is still 100% committed to being here with the Cleveland Browns. So this is all very interesting, and we don't know where it's going to go. I don't think any of us really feel like Deshaun will be playing football for the Cleveland Browns ever again after what we've seen and heard all the way across the board. But, as you mentioned, if he is their best option at some point this year and they still have something at stake, why not? I mean, why not? He's under contract. They're paying him a boatload of money this year. They're paying him a boatload of money next year. And there just might not be anything to lose this year if he looks good enough where you could trot him out there and at least maybe show another team that he's got something left in the tank, right? I mean, that's another thing to consider. How is anybody going to know if he is worth anything anymore if you don't put him out there at all? Is it really going to be, hey, just take our word for it? He looks really good inside the field house. I mean, that's not going to fly. So if there is any thought whatsoever to trying to salvage anything from this and have him be willing to waive his no trade clause, there might come a time where it would make sense to show people what he can do if you're out of it and he's around and he's healthy enough to go out there and play some football. Again, we don't know where any of this is going. And stranger things have happened. Many strange things have happened with the quarterback situation in Cleveland. But every single time that we've asked Andrew Berry about him and we have given Andrew a chance to basically say, we've moved on for good, those words don't get said.
Yeah, just another thing, I guess to keep an eye on. Whatever happens with Deshaun Watson. And of course, this quarterback battle, we're going to talk about it here on the Orange and Brown Talk podcast. You can find us on YouTube, Cleveland Browns on cleveland.com. I know there's some folks out there watching us on YouTube waiting for us to say stuff. So join us on YouTube, Cleveland Browns on cleveland.com. Our Twitter is Orange Brown Talk. Our Instagram is Orange and Brown Talk. And of course, if you're not a Football Insider subscriber, it's cleveland.com/Browns, the blue banner at the top of the page to get info and get signed up on for that. Mary Kay and Ashley, I will talk to both of you later.